There is a strange fact about dogs that most people never think about. One of America's most loved family companions was once celebrated as one of the bravest working animals in the world. It appeared on posters, starred in early films, and was trusted to sleep beside children. Today, that same dog is feared by some people, banned in certain places, and surrounded by endless arguments. How can one animal carry two completely different reputations? To answer that question, we have to travel back more than 200 years, long before anyone had ever heard the name American Pit Bull Terrier. Picture yourself standing in England in the late 18th century. The air smells of coal smoke. Factory chimneys rise above old villages, and thousands of families are pouring into crowded industrial towns. Life is difficult, uncertain, and often brutal. Entertainment reflected that world. Among the most popular spectacles was bull baiting. A powerful bull was tied to a stake while dogs were released to attack it as crowds watched and cheered. Today, it seems shocking, but many people at the time believed the practice made meat better and proved the courage of animals. The dogs used for this grim work were called old bulldogs. They looked nothing like the heavy, wrinkled bulldogs we know today. These dogs were lean, muscular, and astonishingly athletic. They possessed incredible endurance and a determination that seemed impossible to break. Generations of selective breeding had shaped them for one purpose: courage in the face of fear. Then history suddenly changed course. In 1835, Britain outlawed bull baiting. Overnight, these dogs lost the very job they had been created to do. Most working breeds disappear when the world no longer needs them. These dogs did not. Instead, breeders began crossing the old bulldogs with fast, intelligent terriers. They hoped to combine strength with agility, power with quick thinking. The result was remarkable. The new dogs were compact, energetic, and deeply attached to people. No one alive at that moment could have known they were witnessing the birth of one of the most debated dogs in modern history. Right here, I'd love to know your thoughts. Can a dog's reputation be completely changed by human decisions? Then another great movement of history intervened. During the 19th century, thousands of immigrants crossed the Atlantic searching for a better life. They brought livestock, family possessions, and among them, these tough little dogs. In America, the animals found an entirely different purpose. They guarded farms, they hunted vermin, they worked beside settlers on the frontier. Families trusted them. Children played with them. Some people even called them nurse dogs because of their reputation for patience around young children. And this is where the story becomes truly fascinating. The dog that would one day be called the American Pit Bull Terrier did not arrive in America as a symbol of fear. It arrived as something almost forgotten today, a symbol of trust. The real mystery isn't why people once loved these dogs. The real mystery is how that trust was eventually lost. The journey to America was not an easy one. Immigrant ships leaving England and Ireland were crowded, uncomfortable, and sometimes deadly. Families boarded them carrying little more than hope: a few tools, some clothing, a family Bible, perhaps a small wooden chest filled with treasured possessions, and sometimes a dog. Among those animals were the sturdy bulldog terrier crosses that had begun appearing across the British Isles. Nobody called them American Pit Bull Terriers yet. They were simply working dogs, valued not for their appearance but for what they could do. And 19th century America had plenty of work waiting for them. Imagine standing on a small frontier farm in the 1850s. Dawn has barely broken. A rooster crows in the distance. Fences need mending. Livestock must be fed. Predators lurk beyond the tree line, and the nearest neighbor may live miles away. On a farm like this, a good dog is not a pet. It is another pair of hands. These early pit dogs quickly earned a remarkable reputation. They helped move cattle. They hunted rats and other pests. They protected chickens and sheep from predators. If a wild hog threatened the farm, these dogs faced it. If strangers approached after dark, they were often the first to know. But their greatest talent surprised people. Again and again, newspaper accounts and foreign journals described these dogs in almost the same words: dependable, affectionate, and unusually devoted to their families. They wanted to be near people. They followed children through fields. They waited outside schoolhouses. At night, after a long day of work, they curled up beside the same families they had spent the day protecting. Think about that for a moment. It is almost impossible to reconcile this image with the one many people have today. Photographs from the late 19th and early 20th centuries reveal something unexpected. In picture after picture, broad-headed, muscular dogs sit patiently beside young children. Some families even referred to them as nurse dogs, although historians still debate how common that nickname truly was. The photographs, however, tell their own story. These dogs were not treated as dangerous outsiders. They were trusted members of the household, and perhaps that trust came from the qualities humans had carefully bred into them for generations. They were courageous without being timid, powerful without being reckless, and fiercely loyal to the people they considered their own. But hidden inside those admirable qualities was a contradiction. The same strength that made them exceptional farm dogs also attracted another kind of attention. Some people saw something else in these animals. They saw competitors. As the 19th century came to an end, different strains of these dogs spread across America. Breeders admired their intelligence, endurance, and willingness to work. At the same time, the country itself was changing. Small towns were becoming cities. Newspapers reached millions of readers. Motion pictures created new heroes almost overnight. And then one extraordinary dog stepped onto the national stage. He did not become famous for fighting. He became famous for courage. He would go to war, save lives, earn medals, and become one of the most beloved dogs in American history. His name was Stubby. And before America learned to fear these dogs, it first learned to call one of them a hero. Long before social media made animals famous and decades before Hollywood turned dogs into stars, one small stray became one of the most celebrated creatures in American history. His name was Stubby. And if you had met him in 1907, you probably would have walked right past him. He was short and stocky, with a broad head, a wrinkled face, and the sturdy build of a pit-type dog. He had no pedigree, no famous owner, and no idea that he was about to become a legend. The world around him, however, was changing rapidly. In April of 1917, the United States entered the First World War. Thousands of young men gathered at military training camps before leaving for Europe. At one of those camps in Connecticut, a stray dog wandered among the tents. No one knew where he came from, but the soldiers liked him immediately. Among them was a young man named Private J. Robert Conroy. The two became inseparable. So when Conroy's regiment received orders to sail for France, he made a risky decision. He smuggled the little dog aboard the ship. It was against military regulations. But by the time officers discovered the stowaway, something unexpected had happened. Stubby had already become one of the soldiers. Then came France. Mud-filled trenches, endless artillery fire, the constant fear that the next explosion might be the last. And in that terrifying world, the little dog did something extraordinary. Military accounts describe Stubby warning sleeping soldiers of incoming shell fire. On more than one occasion, he reportedly sensed poison gas before the men around him did, barking and running through the trenches until soldiers woke and reached for their masks. At night, he searched for wounded men lying in the darkness. Think about that for a moment. In a place built on fear and destruction, a stray dog became a source of comfort. Soldiers scratched his ears before battle. They looked for him after bombardments, relieved to see that he had survived another day. News of the remarkable little dog soon crossed the Atlantic. America fell in love with him. When the war ended, Stubby did not return home as a stray. He returned home as a hero. He marched in victory parades. He met presidents and military leaders. Newspapers across the country printed his photograph. Children knew his name, and adults admired his courage. To millions of Americans, Stubby represented loyalty, bravery, and unwavering devotion. And here's what makes his story so important. Stubby was not an exception. During the early 20th century, pit-type dogs appeared everywhere in American life. They were featured in advertisements, posed proudly in family photographs, and became symbols of determination and reliability. If you were an American child in the 1920s, you were far more likely to associate these dogs with heroism than with fear. That is what makes the next chapter of this story so difficult to understand. Because reputations rarely collapse in a single moment, they change slowly, quietly, almost invisibly, until one generation forgets what the previous generation knew. The little dog that marched home from war as a national hero belonged to the same family of dogs that would one day become one of the most controversial breeds in America. Somewhere between those two realities, the nation's memory changed, and the first signs of that change were already beginning to appear in an America that no longer looked like the frontier where these dogs had first earned the country's trust. If someone had tried to predict the future of the American Pit Bull Terrier in the years after the First World War, they almost certainly would have gotten it wrong. The breed seemed to have everything. It had public affection, it had a heroic image, and it had something even more powerful. It had a place in the American imagination. The 1920s and 1930s were decades of enormous change. Radios filled living rooms with voices from distant cities. Motion pictures turned actors into national celebrities. For the first time in history, millions of Americans could laugh at the same jokes, listen to the same songs, and recognize the same familiar faces. And one of those faces belonged to a dog. A pit-type dog named Pete the Pup became one of the stars of the popular comedy series Our Gang. With the distinctive ring around one eye, he appeared alongside children in adventure after adventure. To audiences across the country, Pete did not look dangerous. He looked friendly, dependable, the kind of dog you would trust in your own home. The movies reflected what many Americans already knew from everyday life. Open an old family photo album from the 1920s or 1930s, and you will often find these dogs everywhere. They sit on front porches beside children. They pose proudly next to farmers and shopkeepers. They accompany hunters into the woods and rest beside soldiers in uniform. The pictures tell a simple story. These dogs belonged. Then came the Great Depression. Banks failed, businesses closed, millions of people lost their jobs almost overnight. For many families, comfort became difficult to find, and sometimes that comfort came with four legs. On isolated farms and in struggling towns, these sturdy dogs remained what they had always been: workers, guardians, and companions. In hard times, loyalty mattered more than pedigree. But beneath this picture of acceptance, small cracks were beginning to appear. Some breeders believed these dogs should remain practical working animals, judged by their strength, intelligence, and temperament. Others wanted something different. They wanted official recognition from kennel clubs and stricter breed standards. The disagreement would have lasting consequences. During the 1930s, a separate breed known as the American Staffordshire Terrier gradually emerged from the same ancestral stock. The histories of the two breeds remained deeply intertwined, but to ordinary Americans the distinctions often seemed confusing. Were they different breeds, or simply different names for the same dog? Even experts sometimes disagreed. At the same time, another transformation was taking place. America itself was changing. The old agricultural world was slowly disappearing. Cities expanded while rural communities shrank. Fewer families lived on farms. Fewer people needed dogs to guard livestock or work from sunrise to sunset. For generations, the ancestors of the American Pit Bull Terrier had earned their place by being useful. Now, the country that had shaped them was changing faster than they were. And whenever societies change, old roles begin to disappear. Some animals adapt and flourish. Others lose the place they once held. Here's where things become troubling. In the shadows of this modern America, another force was quietly emerging. There were people who looked at these powerful, determined dogs and saw something entirely different from loyalty or companionship. They saw an opportunity, and that would prove to be the greatest danger the breed had ever faced. Because the tragedy of the American Pit Bull Terrier was never rooted in its strength. It began with the humans who decided how that strength should be used. By the middle of the 20th century, the American Pit Bull Terrier had arrived at a crossroads. For generations, these dogs had lived on farms, guarded homesteads, and worked beside the people who depended on them. They had never needed a carefully crafted image or a public relations campaign. Their value was simple. They were useful, but the America that created them was disappearing. The old agricultural world was giving way to factories, suburbs, and growing cities. Millions of people left rural communities and moved into urban neighborhoods. The frontier was gone, and with it vanished many of the jobs that had once given these dogs a clear purpose. Whenever society changes, the meaning of its animals changes too. At first, almost nobody noticed. American Pit Bull Terriers still appeared in family photographs. They still slept on porches and played with children. In parts of the South and Midwest, they continued working on ranches exactly as they always had. Yet another image of the breed was quietly emerging. Certain people began looking for dogs that appeared powerful and intimidating. The broad head, muscular body, and fearless reputation that had once made these animals valuable workers now appealed to people seeking something entirely different. They wanted an animal that projected toughness. And this is where the story takes a darker turn. Strength itself was never the problem. A strong horse is not dangerous because it is powerful. A large ox is not dangerous because of its size. The danger begins when human beings decide how that strength will be used. At the same time, illegal dogfighting continued in hidden corners of the country. It was nothing like the public spectacles of Old England. It existed in basements, abandoned buildings, and remote locations far from the eyes of most Americans. Most people never saw it, but they heard about it, and stories travel much farther than ordinary reality. A single frightening newspaper article can be remembered for years. A shocking incident can spread across an entire city. Meanwhile, thousands of peaceful dogs sleeping beside their families make no headlines at all. Psychologists have a name for this, the availability effect. Since human beings naturally remember dramatic events more easily than ordinary ones. Think about that for a moment. If the only stories you hear about a dog involve danger, what picture begins to form in your mind? Little by little, almost invisibly, public perception started to change. By the 1960s and 1970s, two completely different versions of the American Pit Bull Terrier existed in the American imagination. In one world, the dog remained exactly what it had always been, a loyal companion, a protector, and a trusted member of the family. In another world, it was becoming a symbol of aggression and danger. The remarkable thing is that the dogs themselves had not suddenly changed. Their muscles were the same. Their intelligence was the same. Their deep attachment to people remained rooted in generations of selective breeding. What had changed was the story being told about them. And once a new story takes hold, it can become extraordinarily difficult to reverse. As the 20th century moved toward its final decades, another force was preparing to shape public opinion more powerfully than newspapers ever could. Television entered millions of homes. Evening news became part of everyday life. For the first time in history, one terrible event could be seen by an entire nation almost simultaneously. For the American Pit Bull Terrier, the age of mass media would become both a spotlight and a storm. Because reputations are not built only by what happens. They are built by what people remember, what they fear, and which stories they choose to repeat. The 1980s did not simply change the reputation of the American Pit Bull Terrier. They changed the way America experienced fear. By then, cable television had entered millions of homes. News traveled faster than ever before. A tragedy in one city no longer stayed local. By evening, it could be discussed around dinner tables thousands of miles away. The American Pit Bull Terrier entered this new age of mass media at exactly the wrong moment. Reports of serious dog attacks began appearing with increasing frequency. Some incidents involved pit bulls. Others involved dogs merely identified as pit bulls, even though experts have long noted that visual breed identification is often unreliable. To most viewers, those distinctions mattered very little. The headlines mattered. Words like killer dog and attack breed appeared on television screens and newspaper front pages. Images of snarling dogs spread rapidly across the country. Fear travels quickly because it speaks to one of our oldest instincts, the instinct to protect our families. Imagine being a parent watching the evening news and hearing that a dangerous dog has attacked someone just a few states away. The first question is almost always the same. Could this happen here? Communities began debating the breed with an intensity that would have been unimaginable only a few decades earlier. Some cities proposed restrictions, others considered outright bans. At the same time, scientists and animal behavior specialists were reaching a far more complicated conclusion. Canine behavior, they argued, is shaped by many factors: genetics, training, socialization, environment, and perhaps most importantly, the decisions made by owners. No single explanation tells the entire story. Complicated explanations rarely compete well with frightening headlines. Meanwhile, another problem was quietly growing. As the breed became more famous, demand for these dogs increased. Shelters saw rising numbers of abandoned pit bulls. Some had been bred carelessly and sold indiscriminately. Others had been acquired by people attracted to the dog's intimidating appearance, rather than prepared for the responsibilities of ownership. Popularity became a curse. The more visible the breed became, the more it attracted individuals who saw the dog not as a companion but as a symbol. And the consequences were often tragic. Dogs suffered. Families suffered. Communities suffered. Public trust, once deeply rooted in American culture, began to erode. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, two completely different versions of the American Pit Bull Terrier existed at the same time. In one America, these dogs still chased balls in backyards, slept on couches, and grew old beside families who loved them. In another America, they appeared on television screens behind heavy chains and fences, symbols of danger and controversy. Both realities existed, and that is what made the debate so difficult, because the breed itself had not suddenly transformed. Its strength was the same. Its loyalty was the same. What had changed was the story people believed about it. The question was no longer, what kind of dog is this? The question had become, should this dog even have a place in our communities? The country seemed unable to decide whether the American Pit Bull Terrier was a trusted companion or a threat. Then, in the early years of the 21st century, one event forced millions of people to confront that question again. It involved a criminal investigation. One of the most famous athletes in America, and dozens of dogs whose fate would challenge nearly everything the public thought it knew about pit bulls. Because the next chapter of this story asks a painful question. When humans commit acts of cruelty, how much of the blame should be carried by the animals in their care? In the summer of 2007, one of the most famous men in American sports seemed to have everything. His name was Michael Vick. He was a superstar quarterback, admired by millions and known for doing things on a football field that seemed almost impossible. Children wore his jersey. Fans packed stadiums to watch him play. His future appeared limitless. Then federal investigators uncovered something hidden far from the bright lights of professional sports. On a rural property in Virginia, authorities discovered an illegal dogfighting operation. The news exploded across the country. Television stations interrupted regular programming. Newspapers printed disturbing photographs of chained dogs and training equipment. For many Americans, it was their first glimpse into a brutal underground world that had existed largely out of sight. At the center of the story were dozens of American Pit Bull Terriers. The reaction was immediate. Many people were horrified by the cruelty inflicted upon the animals. Others saw the case as proof that pit bulls themselves were inherently dangerous. Animal shelters feared that panic and misunderstanding would lead to another wave of abandoned dogs. Then, an unexpected question emerged. What should happen to the rescued animals? At first, many experts believed the answer was obvious. The dogs had lived in terrible conditions and had been associated with organized cruelty. Some feared they could never safely live ordinary lives. Their future looked hopeless. But several animal welfare organizations argued for something different. They asked that each dog be evaluated as an individual rather than condemned as a group. It was a decision that would change the conversation. Some of the dogs entered rehabilitation programs. Trainers and behavior specialists worked with them patiently, one animal at a time. The results surprised almost everyone. Numerous dogs adapted successfully to loving homes. Some became affectionate family companions. A few achieved something almost unimaginable. They became therapy dogs, comforting people recovering from trauma and loss. Think about that for a moment. Animals that many believed were beyond help were now helping human beings heal. Their stories carried an uncomfortable message. If dogs that had endured such terrible experiences could still learn trust, affection, and stability, then perhaps the relationship between breed and behavior was far more complicated than many people had assumed. The case soon became about more than one athlete or one criminal investigation. It became a national argument. Could an entire breed be judged by the actions of some owners? Could a label explain millions of individual animals with different experiences, temperaments, and histories? As these questions spread, something unusual happened. Fear and compassion grew at the same time. Some cities moved toward breed restrictions and bans, believing they were protecting public safety. Others pointed to the rescued dogs as evidence that environment and human choices mattered far more than simple breed labels. Two completely different ideas of the American Pit Bull Terrier now existed side by side. One saw the dogs as inherently dangerous. The other saw them as victims of human decisions. Both sides believed they were defending what was right. And that is why the debate became so fierce. Because it was no longer simply about dogs. It was about responsibility, fear, and the limits of human judgment. Then scientists entered the argument and began searching for answers in a place that neither headlines nor courtrooms could reach. They looked deep inside the dogs themselves, into their genes, and what they discovered would challenge assumptions on every side of the debate. For more than a century, people believed they understood dogs. A herding dog would herd. A retriever would retrieve. A guard dog would protect its home. Breed, many assumed, was destiny. And when it came to pit bulls, countless people believed the story had already been written. Then science began asking uncomfortable questions. In the early 21st century, advances in genetics gave researchers tools that previous generations could scarcely have imagined. Scientists could now examine canine DNA in extraordinary detail, comparing thousands of dogs and searching for answers hidden deep within their genes. What they discovered was far more complicated than many expected. Certain traits can indeed be inherited. Some dogs may be more likely to display particular tendencies because of their ancestry, but study after study suggested that predicting the behavior of an individual dog based solely on breed is remarkably difficult. Experience mattered. Training mattered. Socialization mattered. The environment in which a dog lived often shaped its behavior just as profoundly as the genes it carried. In other words, DNA could influence the story, but it did not write every chapter. Then researchers encountered another surprising problem. Ask 10 people to point to a pit bull and they may point to 10 different dogs. Studies found that even experienced shelter workers and professionals frequently disagreed when identifying pit-type dogs by appearance alone. Some animals labeled as pit bulls shared little genetic similarity with one another. Others carried pit bull ancestry that nobody would have guessed simply by looking at them. Think about what that means. If people cannot always agree on what a pit bull is, then how certain can anyone be when drawing broad conclusions about all pit bulls? Suddenly, the debate became much larger than one breed. Because the American Pit Bull Terrier was never a single story. It was many stories unfolding at the same time. There are pit bulls that work as therapy animals, comforting hospital patients, and helping anxious children learn to read. There are pit bulls that serve in search and rescue programs. There are pit bulls that spend quiet evenings asleep beside family fireplaces. There are also stories of attacks and tragedy events that leave lasting scars on victims and communities and shape public fear in powerful ways. Both realities exist. Neither can simply be dismissed. Imagine two neighbors living on the same street. One remembers a beloved dog that spent 15 gentle years beside the family hearth and cannot understand why anyone fears the breed. The other remembers frightening headlines and painful stories from the evening news and cannot understand why anyone would trust such a dog. Both believe they know the truth. Both are sincere, grassy, yet their truths are entirely different. And perhaps that is the real mystery of the American Pit Bull Terrier. The argument is no longer only about dogs. It is about memory. It is about perception. It is about the way human beings interpret risk. Why do some stories stay with us for decades while others quietly disappear? Why does fear sometimes become stronger than personal experience? And why can affection survive even in the face of controversy? As scientists searched for answers in genetics, lawmakers searched for answers in legislation. Cities and entire countries introduced breed-specific laws, hoping to solve a problem that remained difficult even to define. By now, the American Pit Bull Terrier had become something far larger than a breed. It had become a symbol of one of the most emotional and unresolved debates about animals in modern history. And the final chapter of this story is not really about dogs at all. It is about what happens when fear, memory, and love all compete to define the same animal. By the beginning of the 21st century, the American Pit Bull Terrier had become something unusual. It was no longer simply a breed of dog. It had become an idea. And ideas are powerful because no two people see them in exactly the same way. To some, the pit bull represented loyalty, resilience, and companionship. To others, it represented danger and risk. Few animals in modern history have carried two completely different identities at the same time. The disagreement eventually moved beyond newspapers and television. It entered courtrooms, city councils, state legislatures. Across the United States and in countries around the world, governments introduced what became known as breed-specific legislation, often called BSL. Some places restricted pit bulls, others banned them altogether. The goal seemed simple: reduce serious dog attacks and improve public safety. Yet even here, the story refused to become simple. Supporters of these laws believed they were acting responsibly. They looked at frightening incidents and concluded that restrictions were necessary. Opponents saw something different. Veterinarians, animal behavior specialists, and many dog owners argued that focusing on breed alone ignored a far more complicated reality: training, neglect, socialization, abuse, and the countless decisions made by human beings. And here's where things become fascinating. Different societies reached entirely different conclusions. Imagine two cities separated by only a few hundred miles. In one city, a family walks its pit bull through the park without a second thought. In another, owning a dog that looks almost identical could bring legal restrictions or even force a family to move. The dog has not changed. Human opinion has. Think about that for a moment. If the same animal can be viewed as safe in one place and dangerous in another, what exactly are people judging? The breed itself, or the stories they have inherited about it? Meanwhile, another movement was quietly gaining strength. Animal shelters and rescue organizations began telling different kinds of stories. Volunteers introduced the public to abandoned dogs that had become gentle companions. Social media filled with images that seemed to belong to another era: pit bulls sleeping beside children, wearing birthday hats, resting on couches, and growing old with families who adored them. For many people, these pictures felt strangely familiar. They looked like the photographs from the early 20th century. The same broad heads, the same patient expressions, the same dogs that once appeared beside farmers, soldiers, and children. It was as though an older memory had returned. And that is why the argument over the American Pit Bull Terrier became so emotional. The breed seemed to exist in 2 centuries at once. In one version of history, it remained a symbol of danger and fear. In another, it was still the trusted companion that crossed the Atlantic with immigrants, guarded homesteads, and marched home from war as a hero. The battle over the breed's reputation had become a battle over memory itself. And a new generation began asking a question that historians, scientists, and dog lovers still struggle to answer. Who is the real American Pit Bull Terrier? The answer may not be found in its muscles, its appearance, or even its DNA. The answer may lie in a much older story, a story that began centuries ago when humans shaped a determined working dog and, in doing so, unknowingly shaped one of the most controversial animal reputations in modern history. And that brings us back to where this story truly began. In the end, the history of the American Pit Bull Terrier is not really the story of a dog. It is the story of a mirror. For more than 200 years, every generation has looked into that mirror and seen something different. The farmers of 19th century America saw a hard-working partner that guarded the homestead and followed children through the fields. The soldiers of the First World War saw courage and loyalty in a small dog named Stubby. Movie audiences saw a cheerful companion. Rescue workers saw animals deserving of second chances. Others looked at tragic attacks, frightening headlines, and criminal abuse and saw something entirely different. Perhaps none of them were completely wrong, and perhaps none of them saw the whole picture. The American Pit Bull Terrier did not wake up one morning and decide to become a symbol of controversy. Its strength remained. Its intelligence remained. Most of all, its deep attachment to human beings remained. What changed was the world around it and the stories people chose to tell about it. That may be the most important lesson in this entire history. Because when people argue about pit bulls, they are often arguing about something much larger than a breed of dog. They are arguing about nature and nurture, about fear and responsibility, about second chances, about whether an individual should be judged by a label, and about whether a reputation, once created, can ever truly be changed. Imagine a puppy being born somewhere in America tonight. It knows nothing of the smoky streets of old England where its ancestors were first shaped. It knows nothing of immigrant ships crossing the Atlantic, nothing of lonely farms on the frontier, nothing of war heroes, movie stars, or courtroom debates. It knows nothing of laws, headlines, or human arguments. It knows only one thing: to trust. Everything that happens after that depends largely on the people who enter its life. Some will raise a beloved companion that sleeps beside the family sofa for 15 happy years. Others may neglect, exploit, or misunderstand the animal entirely. The same beginning can lead to very different endings. And perhaps that is why the American Pit Bull Terrier continues to fascinate and divide people more than almost any other breed. Its history forces us to confront uncomfortable truths, not only about dogs, but about ourselves. Centuries ago, breeders in Britain created a determined, athletic working dog. Immigrants carried those dogs across the Atlantic to a young nation where they became farmhands, guardians, and companions. They marched to war, appeared in films, sat patiently beside children in family photographs. Then the world changed. New fears emerged. New stories were told. And the same dog became a symbol of entirely different things to different people. The old farm dog, the war hero, the controversial breed, the rescued companion, they all belong to the same history. And somewhere between those stories lies the real American Pit Bull Terrier. Perhaps the breed's greatest mystery is not what kind of dog it is. Perhaps the real mystery is why humans have spent more than 200 years seeing so many different reflections in the same animal. And if this journey changed the way you think about this remarkable breed, share your thoughts below and subscribe for more stories that challenge what we think we know, because history is often at its most fascinating when it forces us to question our own assumptions.